Hello and hello everyone, and welcome to this evening or today, depending on when the world you are, Dementia Researcher Salon Debate. I'm Adam Smith, and once again, I'll be your host for this evening for the next hour. Thank you very much for joining us here in the Dementia Researcher community. Tonight's motion looks at one of the most talked about developments in modern science and healthcare. This house believes that AI is furthering disparities in research and care. As artificial intelligence becomes more integrated into dementia research and clinical practice, it brings the promise of improved diagnosis, treatment, and data-driven insights. But it also raises critical questions about fairness, representation, and access. So is AI helping to reduce inequalities or make them worse? Speaking for the motion this evening, we have welcome back Dr. Isabel Castanho, who is an instructor at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, Harvard Medical School in Boston. Her research investigates protective mechanisms in Alzheimer's and related neurodegenerative diseases using single-cell and spatial transcriptomics to explore cognitive resilience. She completed her PhD at the University of Exeter and now works at the intersection of computational and experimental neuroscience. Did I get that right, Isabel? Close enough?
Yes, perfect.
And speaking against the motion, we're joined by Dr. Eleanor Conole, who is a junior research fellow in applied AI at the University of Oxford, affiliated with the Department of Biochemistry. Her research examines the links between inflammation and brain aging and cognitive decline, building on her previous work with Lothian birth cohorts at the University of Edinburgh. She also holds a PhD in neuroscience, which was funded by the Wellcome Trust. Hello, Eleanor. Was that close?
Perfect.
Brilliant. Okay, so thank you both for being here this evening. Let me explain the format for those of you who haven't already been here before. This is how tonight's debate will run. Each speaker will start by giving 10-minute opening statements to present their case. And today I will remember to set the timer. And after that, we'll open the floor for, we'll have a little chat, and then we'll open the floor for 15 minutes of audience Q&A, selecting questions which you can make using the Q&A button at the bottom, which I'm going to enable now. You don't have to wait for the Q&A to ask your questions. You can post those in there at any time. And if you've got points to make as well, we will try to highlight those points if you have your own observations. But we might not get around to all of them, but we will do our best. And then at the very end, both of Eleanor and Isabel will make some closing arguments, and we'll have a vote using Slido to get your views and see how opinions have changed. But to start with, we of course, I forgot to mention this, we start with a vote. So if you haven't already, those of you signed up a little while ago should have gotten a link sent to you in the reminder. But just in case you didn't, I'm going to post into the chat now. Here is a link for you to vote in our initial vote to see where you are at the start of this debate. So I'll just remind you of that motion again. This House believes that AI is furthering disparities in research and care. So I'm going to give you all a couple of minutes to go, a minute to click that link, and I know if you're using the app, it's going to take you away from the screen. So do make sure you click and then come back again. So we're going to give you a minute to vote. And while you're voting, I'm going to share my screen so we can see how things are at the start. Where's the button? They've added new buttons in the last week, so this has changed. So here we are. This is where we are as we start. So, very evenly split. So there's all to play for. So 50% undecided, 30% as it stands disagree with the House, 20% not. I'm not even going to read out these numbers because they're changing. Of course they are. So this is where we stand. So it looks like there's all to play for as we hear from Isabel first, who's going to make the case for the House, and then we'll move on to Eleanor first. I'm going to leave that voting open just for during the first minute of Isabel's talk, but I'm not going to leave it open any longer, otherwise we might sway you. But that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Isabel now. Isabel, you're welcome to make your opening statement.
Thank you, Adam. This is exciting. Hi, everyone. I love how undecided people are because I do love a good debate. First of all, it's a joy to be here and collaborate with Dementia Researcher once again. Although this is my first time on a debate format, and I really wanted to say that I love this format. It's a real example of how science grows from discussing ideas and debating different perspectives. So I'm all about having my own mind change today. And so I'm looking forward to debating this topic with Dr. Eleanor Conole, although I expect to leave with even more questions than I start with. Okay, like everything science, so hopefully not. So, my opening statement. As AI revolutionizes our world, I think what I hear the most is that AI will democratize knowledge and accelerate discovery, and even that it will make healthcare more equitable. But if we look closely beneath the glow and all the hype and think about how it is built, what happens under the hood really, AI doesn't start from a blank page. It learns from us, from our data, our systems, and our biases. And when you feed structural inequities into an exponential machine, what you get is not equity, it's amplification of what's already there. And so now I will list and detail 4 points or arguments to justify my position. So, point number one, amplification of existing biases in training data. And I alluded to this already. So, AI systems are only as fair as the data they're trained on. In medical research, those data sets overwhelmingly represent people from high income countries, often of European descent. And I work in genomics, so that's very, very much the case. Clinical trials still underrepresent women, racial minorities, and people from low income backgrounds. So when an AI model predicts disease risk, diagnoses cancer from, for example, skin photos, or recommends a treatment plan, it is drawing conclusions from a narrow representation of humanity and applying them universally. In other words, the technology reflects the imbalance of our reality. It learns from an unequal past and present and scales existing inequalities into the future. So that's my point number one. Point number two, unequal access to AI and centralization of power. The hospitals, research centers, and universities with the resources to use AI are already the most advanced. They have the data, they have the computing power, the funding, the partnerships with private companies, including tech companies. And I think about this the same way. So I'm as throughout my career, I guess. I'm originally from Portugal. I'm now in Boston at Harvard Medical School. You can probably imagine that the difference in access to everything is very different now for me than it was when I started. I started when I was doing my master's in Portugal. I would email authors to send me their papers because I didn't have access to them. And so it's a similar thing with AI. Here I have access to so many resources that I imagine many universities do not have access to. And so, in places like rural health clinics, underfunded institutions, entire regions of the world, they can remain on the sidelines where others are in the forefront. So, while AI promises to close the gap, it can actually widen it by giving more to those who already have a lot and the most, even. And let's be honest, this is not a technological failure. It's really a social one because we've allowed innovation to be centralized in the hands of a few when it should be designed to benefit all. Point three, the illusion of agency and accountability. AI is not just redistributing data and resources, it's redistributing power, and with it, our sense of agency and accountability. AI shifts agency by moving decision making from humans to algorithms. So, just to make sure everyone is on the same page, agency is defined as our ability to intentionally and feel in control in our actions. And if we humans lose that, if we no longer feel in charge, we risk becoming passive participants in our own healthcare, which I personally find scary. Clinicians may come to trust or even defer to these systems. Patients may feel alienated when they can't understand how a diagnosis was made. So we cannot let technology, however powerful, strip us that fundamental sense of control. And then there's accountability. When mistakes are made, who's to blame? The algorithm? The people who built it? The clinician who relied on it? We need serious conversations about how to preserve real agency and ensure that systems remain genuinely accountable for their use, misuse, and mistakes. AI associated inequalities aren't only about data or access, they also extend to who holds control and responsibility in this new landscape. And finally, my point number 4, the need for regulation and honestly some realism. Regulations are not the enemy of innovation, but the precondition for safe innovation. Regulations are the reason why planes are safe and cars crash less often, and when they do, consequences are not as bad. Likewise, we need regulation in AI, not as red tape, but as a seatbelt or as an airbag. Today, we have cars that are faster than before, but also, in general, safer than before. The goal should not be to halt AI, but to guide it so it serves everyone, not just a few. We must build systems that are transparent and accountable and equitable by design. I think we're still far from being there, but I do look at the future through a lens of hope. We need to invest our time and energy in better, more equitable AI. That's all. That's my opening statement.
Perfect. Lots of time left over as well. So you'll very good. Thank you very much. And we're just going to go straight into Eleanor now, who is going to make the case against the House. Over to you, Eleanor.
Thank you. Thanks, Isabel. I thought that was an excellent opening statement that actually frames lots of my points in your argument for the motion. So I think this motion, claiming that AI is furthering disparities in research and care, one of the things that we need to think about when we're talking about this topic is that it's really easy to make AI a scapegoat. And it's not that these risks are imaginary, they're real, but those risks are being confronted through AI, they're not being caused by it. In practice, AI is exposing inequalities that are already present and moving inclusion to the center of research design and providing the tools to make sure care is more consistent across settings is what's going to address that. Like Isabel, my work is in genomics, and from that vantage point, we see that the largest drivers of inequity are already quite predictable. There's a historic underrepresentation of many populations in research, there's racial bias, and those problems have been there for a long time. They're not caused by AI, they're not created by AI, they're problems into which AI has arrived, they're problems that AI has inherited. And in many cases, AI can be used to reduce those effects. So I'm going to make several points. I'm going to talk about how AI can expand access and improve outcomes where specialist capacity is scarce. I'm going to talk about how AI can actually highlight and amplify bias rather than reinforce it. I'm going to talk about how AI can help us accelerate inclusion and openness in research, and talk about how governance is already moving decisively towards equity by design, making bias measurable and correctable. I want us to really think about this debate in terms of those common objections that Isabel raised: bias, that digital divide, opacity, and the concentration of power. And I want us to think about how AI can mitigate those rather than amplify them. So first off, access and outcomes. This idea that AI can extend capacity where inequity is at its greatest. So disparities grow generally when people can't reach specialists or they wait months for diagnostics and care. And actually, AI has been deployed precisely at those bottlenecks in under-resourced settings. So there are several examples I want to go through. One is diabetic eye disease. So there's been some really interesting work that looks at the automated analysis of retinal images and using AI to support large-scale screening initiatives outside of tertiary centres, including rollouts in India and in Thailand, with hundreds of thousands of examinations delivered where eye doctors are scarce. The result of that is earlier treatment and prevention of avoidable blindness in populations who previously had no routine access. We've got other healthcare examples like cervical cancer screening initiatives, where AI-assisted technology has helped coloscopies in Rwanda to screen thousands of women to detect precancerous cells at the first visit and reduce the loss at follow-up. And that's a direct reduction in disparity produced by faster local decision-making. There's an aspect of this that's to do with operational efficiency. So this idea that AI can help with the tasks that humans aren't very good at, reducing that backlog of certain tasks, and supporting referral triage and human in the loop processes. These aren't abstract gains, they're things that actually shorten wait lists and times that actually disproportionately harm people with fewer resources to navigate them. My second point is with regards to this bias that we're talking about. So this bias, I think, is the strongest claim that's in favor of the motion. Algorithmic bias. It's real and it matters, and it's not new. It's a computational reflection of long-standing inequities in both data and practice. I think the relevant question here is whether the field has the tools and incentives to detect and correct that bias, and I think it does. There's this idea that we can audit things, so performance can be evaluated by subgroup. So when models underperform for a population, we can observe that. And we can't observe that when we've got implicit human bias at play. So we can then take corrective action. So we can change our target proxies, we can retrain, we can adjust our thresholds, we can revalidate across sites. These corrections can be executed faster than we can change entrenched clinical behaviours that might amplify bias. We can then try and align our regulatory frameworks. So equity requirements are now being embedded into approval and evaluation across the board. So we're seeing that in NICE, we're seeing that across grant bodies and organisations. The representativeness of the training data is being highlighted as a result of these AI models amplifying bias and highlighting where the problems occur. So that has resulted in a huge load of documentation of mitigation strategies to that effect. There's been national evaluation programs that now incorporate those expectations. And while bias is remaining a risk, it's a risk for now that we have explicit controls to try and fight against. AI is highlighting problems that were already there, and it's sort of shedding a light on them rather than just sweeping them under the rug. This idea that AI is entrenching bias in minority groups is something that we can practically address by trying to recruit more diverse populations. The evidence of bias is arguing for better design and governance, not for the claim that AI is just furthering that disparity in the first place. I think when we're thinking about wider coordination across pathways, AI is reducing this fragmentation that could potentially harm patients. So inequity seems to increase at these different interfaces. So in a care setting, that's things like discharge without follow-up or poor information flow between hospital and primary care settings. If we can link hospital, primary care and community data, we can identify patients who are likely to deteriorate after discharge and trigger follow-up. We can standardize things. We can automate accurate discharge summaries and decision support prompts to reduce omissions and variation in referrals. And we can also just improve a load of inefficiencies in the system. They're practical improvements for patients who typically experience the worst outcomes in our current healthcare settings. And they're actual reductions in disparity driven by better coordination. Overall, I think we should be thinking about causality. We should think about how disparities in research and care predate AI. The question before us is whether AI is furthering those disparities rather than just shedding a light on them in the first place. AI is revealing these inequities that were previously potentially not as visible. It's giving us practical tools where specialist capacity is thin on the ground. It's helping us see where the problems are, and it's prompting us to widen participation research and move governance towards explicit equity requirements. There are myriad futures ahead of us. We can allow this inequity to persist in this analog form as subjective, somewhat unmeasured, and difficult to correct, or we can use AI as a lens to both expose it and as a mechanism to reduce it with clear standards and patient involvement. On that basis, I think the motion should be rejected.
Great to see we've already had some questions coming through as well. Great points made on both sides. Isabel, I'm going to invite you to respond to Eleanor's opening statement.
Okay. I don't necessarily disagree with anything that Eleanor said. Maybe just the highlight about which I agree with what she said. I just want to take us back to the title of the discussion. I completely agree that AI is not the cause; it's just building on existing problems, and therefore. Here, the discussion is about furthering. It's definitely not a cause. We're in full agreement about that. And I also completely agree about how we are, as a community, already trying to address the inequalities, inequities around us. But I just wanted also to highlight that by the recognition of the biases is not the same, or awareness rather, is not the same as correcting them. So although the biases are now recognized and actively being addressed, I feel there is still a lot of awareness, and we're taking a few steps. I'm not saying necessarily steps back, but maybe we're not moving as forward as at least I would like us to be as in general as humans. And I say this also in context with the current world or political climate. Um, I feel like we are probably focusing on technical fixes to a social problem, and then we're having some breaks. With when overall there's now a question, or people are questioning about DEI, it becomes even harder to address that. And so, anyways, I just wanted to highlight that we can't solve structural underrepresentation with technology alone. It really requires investment in data diversity, as Eleanor mentioned, ethical considerations, but also political action for sure. And I feel like different countries are doing, or different areas of the world are doing, or addressing this differently. That's all I just wanted to mention.
Which does raise some interesting questions for later, not for now, about consistency in application, doesn't it? Eleanor, would you like to respond to Isabel? Although, of course, you may have already done that in your talk if you varied.
So am I responding to Isabel or asking questions about things she raised in her opening statement?
Well, you can do both at this stage.
So I think Isabel and I are basically on the same team here.
No.
But I think one of the things, I'm just looking at my notes from Isabel's opening statement, and one of the things I thought was really interesting is that Isabel talked about where power is, right? So this idea that AI has this potential to give power to institutions and organizations which already have set up for AI. And I think one of the things that AI is best at is scaling up and speeding up what humans find hard. And AI is initially really, really expensive to create and deploy. But actually, once it's up and running, it has the potential to promote open access and promote an inclusion of tools that is much more open source and public sector So we see that with NHS AI Lab. We're seeing lots of people being able to access state-of-the-art technology at low cost and for free. It's now really easy just to switch between LLM model providers, for example. So people have a pipeline set up in ChatGPT can really easily switch over to Claude, much easier than previous tech. I think this idea of bias being a training issue and a social issue is really key here, because AI can be retrained faster than humans can. When this idea that AI is only available to rich countries and institutions, that's definitely true at that initial stage of AI development. But like all digital tech over time, that cost falls dramatically with scale, which then results in much wider access. I think, like most new technical revolutions, when new tech comes, it's here to stay. We're not getting rid of this problem of AI. And so it's a tool, not a moral framework. It's going to bring both risk and opportunity. It's up to us to manage those risks carefully. Disparities in healthcare and research at present are mostly driven by availability and cost, and historically, where these have fallen, access has then dramatically increased. So while there are those risks and challenges that Isabel's mentioned, ultimately these can be outweighed by putting pressure on different government frameworks and trying to promote equity and embed these into our systems. There are a couple of these that are already being developed. There was a really interesting white paper that researchers at Imperial put forward that goes through some of the frameworks that are being developed to improve these equity problems. And overall, I'm hopeful that we can use AI to reduce disparity rather than encourage it.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. Well, you've both made good opening statements and responded to each other well. So I'm going to remind everybody who's watching, you can ask your questions in the chat now. We've already got a few. You can make them anonymous or not. I'm going to go in with a couple of questions that I've pre-prepared now, which I'm going to come to you, Isabel, first. I'm going to ask you to back this up to some extent. What examples suggest that AI tools are amplifying existing inequalities, like right now? Can you give us an example of an inequality that actually is there already?
Well, I mentioned working in genomics. That would, because there's so many populations that are underrepresented in. Clear example. I'm not applying any AI addressing the problem or that particular data set with AI, but I know a lot of groups that are working on it. UK Biobank, it's a super popular, famous genetic study. If you look at the population in that's just one example of, I work, for example, with RoseMap, with data from RoseMap. Again, and Eleanor mentioned this, there is a big effort right now for recruiting other populations, for people to make these studies better in terms of representing the people in the world. But if you are using those data sets to train anything and then you try to apply, it's really not representing the world. So that's a specific example.
That actually really brings us to one of the questions. So let's get this question from one of our audience members out of the way, because I think the point you're going to make is actually the same question, which is where has it gone? Here, I'm going to spotlight it on the screen. AI depends on large data sets. Many come from high-income countries. And as we've talked about recently as well in some other debates about white middle-class people often being those that come forward to participate in research, that if we're training models that are making or being asked to make decisions now, how do we ensure that people benefit from that if they're trained incorrectly in the first place?
And Eleanor mentioned this
that's probably
too.
more of a question for Eleanor, actually.
Yeah,
I can try and answer this if you want. So I think, like, the key thing here is you've got to diversify the data you're using and decentralized development, right? So that means investing in data collection and annotation in those low and middle income countries using federated learning, so models can train across borders without exploring and exploiting sensitive data, and then mandating that representativeness with regulatory approval. So we've already seen initiatives like that. There's H3 Africa. There's the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. There's plenty of WHO-backed AI validation projects that already are trying to address and do exactly that. So I think the solution there is, again, inclusion in data and governance, not just the blind rejection of AI technology in the first place.
So I guess it's great that we recognise that issue. Isabel, are we going far enough with that? Is there a risk that if we don't do that enough, that actually, this case about disparities will happen?
Absolutely. And I just wanted also to say something, and Eleanor like sort of sorted out. Yes, we're in the same team for sure. I just feel I'm excited about AI like everyone else. And maybe I was more in the beginning because of all the hype. And that's as things developed, I felt the need of playing the devil's advocate here because I feel like someone has to do it. More people should do it because I don't think enough people are putting in effort about addressing the limitations. It feels like, and Eleanor is clearly not the example. She's definitely putting in effort to solve the issues. But the problem is, I feel like in a lot of people's heads, AI is the solution. And like Eleanor said, it's a tool and it can offer us the solutions or help us with the solutions for the problem for existing problems that we have. It's just that, yes, I agree with Eleanor, it's not the cause of the problem, but it's also not the solution. We need to think about how we can use it to then apply the solutions. So yeah, and your question, Adam, I think I answered it at the
I
beginning.
think you did. I've got my next one here though, which is how can the use of proprietary, because Eleanor, you talked about algorithms that are being developed and how these are being open and shared, but how can the use of proprietary algorithms or opaque systems, how are those things contributing to inequalities?
Is this for me
Isabel.
or Isabel to answer?
Sorry, it's for Isabel.
Oh, it is for me. Okay, yeah. I
Are
thought
those
somebody said Eleanor.
algorithms and those opaque systems, are they contributing to this inequality?
100%. So that's one of my main concerns right now. AI is even being monetized. So when you have that, and I brought that up even like with at all or so many multiple ways, it's actually increasing inequalities, and it's by access to data even. So that's one. If it's in with private companies, um, yeah, definitely making it more difficult. Um, but also in terms of access as users. So it's not only it's amplifying so many things at different levels that so for example, even with the private companies, if we think about either is someone private who like either on a personal way that starts using them, or again, like I said, in my institution, for example, we have even if I couldn't myself have access to certain systems, my institution gives us access to a lot of the systems that another institution that is not financially stable like Harvard is can offer their students and their staff and so on. So yes, 100% we need more investment from not only universities and governments on a local basis, but also to think about reaching those low income countries and regions that would not have access to these systems otherwise.
Ellen, how do you respond to that? You're in Oxford,
Yeah.
one of the
So,
wealthiest universities in the country. Isabel's, in Harvard.
yeah.
You both have access to supercomputers and money and everything else. Are you the same position as though you're in, I don't know, I don't want to pick somebody out, Huddersfield.
Yeah.
I think they do a lot of dementia research. We'll pick one out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the solution, right, is open source software, shared data sets, and equitable funding models that make advanced AI methods publicly accessible. So when you have those safeguards in place, then AI tech has that potential to lower barriers rather than raise them up. And when access is as it is at the moment, depending on costly licenses or compute resources, then smaller and lower income research groups are going to be at a disadvantage. So, yeah,
Universities don't have the best record of sharing things, so do they? I mean, Oxford's, you create some wonderful algorithms and research tool that can help people working in genomics across the world. Is Oxford just going to give that away to everybody?
yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, like one of the things that this boom in AI has done is it's actually brought this concept of open science back into the debate again in a much bigger way. And we already have like an idea about what equitable standards look like because we have fair research guidelines, right? That came about as a result of an explosion in data. That's why those fair guidelines were created in the first place. Like, how do we manage our data? How do we use it effectively? And so I think sort of putting effort and thought into initiatives and frameworks that look at AI through the same lens as something like the FAIR framework is useful. So I can't off the top of my head remember. I think there's something called the Future AI framework that came out earlier this year, which was looking at addressing those things. But yeah, you're right. We're both in very privileged institutions that with lots of resources and access at our fingertips. But yeah, I think the solution is open access, equitable funding, and
But which actually answers my next question for ourselves, which is, are we going to find that as we increase use of AI, that those expertise are going to become concentrated in specific institutions in that way? Not necessarily the models, as you said, that they're all open, and there was the big news a few months ago about cheaper AI coming out of China and other parts of the world, that these companies are jumping on this, which opens it up. But the skills end up being in a small number of places. And if you, just to throw another one in there, I suppose this is not really a debate about inequalities, but do you need to be a researcher? Is this going to open up our access, do you think, to people who aren't necessarily interested in specific diseases or with that knowledge that actually you're an AI expert? I don't know if that's really a question.
Well, I think, I mean, one of the things, that last question, I think one of the things that researchers currently, I think, undersell themselves on is the level of tacit knowledge they have from just working intimately with the data that they do. So you might think that an AI researcher could come along and just use your genomic data set and then pull out a load of interesting findings from it. But it's surprising how much knowledge you have that is at your fingertips without even really realizing. And I think actually that's something that's going to become more and more apparent the more that AI is developed. I actually think real world experience is going to become more and more valuable. I think human in the loop designs are going to be more and more popular. And I also think at the level of just research, I think you're going to see much more inclusion of human participatory research into data sets as a kind of pushback against that.
Okay. Let's go to our audience questions. Just a reminder, post your questions. I'm going to pick the first one here, which is at the top of the list, which is, I'm going to come back to you, Isabel. Are commercial AI platforms in healthcare putting profit before fairness? Is this push on AI all really just down to money?
Well, this is my personal view, but yes, I mean, like any company, if the model as it is right now, it makes sense, right? The company's not there to think about not having a profit. Their top goal will be to profit. At the same time, this is where things like regulations that I mentioned before come in as such important things to make sure that it's being done in a fair way, using a different use for fair here. But one thing that I wanted to say about regulations as well is that at the same time, we don't want, it needs to be a balance. We don't want to be on the opposite end where, so yesterday I have a student here who is implementing some AI models on a particular project that we're developing. And we were discussing how, for example, in his institution in Europe, he's going through a lot of challenges justifying the projects he's working on, because just having users run or come in AI models can be considered identifiable information, which I get that. But at the same time, he was going through, um, I think at this point also, this is completely normal, just like when we try to do science communication, but there's basically a disconnect between or what he's trying to do, and the person on the other side understanding how it's implemented and what difficulties may be associated with it. But this to say, we don't want to be in a position where regulations are actually stopping or putting a halt into innovation. We want to find um, a balance where regulations are there. So, like I mentioned before, in a car, you have airbags, you have seat belts, but the car moves. So they're there just to make it safer. But you also don't want to make it in a way that the car can't move, if that makes sense. So just wanted to make sure that when I say regulations, I feel like we cannot also be in a situation where it's just too much and it's halting innovation. It needs to be the correct balance, or the most appropriate balance.
I tried to pick up on your point about airbags and seatbelts and things, which of course were offered before they were a requirement. They were kind of optional extras that you had to pay more money
Or
for.
inexistent, right? In the
Yeah,
very old days.
and then eventually they became, right, okay, you must use these now. Are we outpacing? And this actually leads us in nicely to one of the audience questions, which is the, and I think there's general recognition, isn't there, that regulation is behind development, that we're developing this so quickly. Is
Yes.
in using AI in healthcare, though, one of those areas where regulation has to keep pace because the risks are so high if we don't? And it's not like you're adding your seatbelts and benefits. So actually, let's just take that question then from the audience, which is here it is. Let me find it. No, I'm sure I've seen
You
an audience
lost
question.
it?
Here we are. Here it is. If an algorithm predicts somebody is at high risk of dementia or had a disease, which is something we know, you gave a great example, Eleanor, of it being used to look at eye scans, for example, at the Morehouse to predict diabetic retinopathy. Who's accountable if it gets it wrong? Is it the developer, the clinician, the institution? If we're really considering, or are we not at the stage where we're putting lives at the stake of AI? But we might be. What do you think, Eleanor?
I think that ultimately, accountability is still going to lie with both the clinicians and the institutions that are using the algorithms. If we sort of look at this more historically, if we've got a textbook that has a flowchart for how to diagnose something, and you use that flowchart and you're wrong, who's wrong, you or the flowchart? AI is ultimately providing decision support tools. It's not providing an autonomous diagnosis, and clinicians need to interpret the output of models with clinical context. and institutions are responsible for validating, approving, and monitoring the use of that AI technology. So I think with this question, like, is the developer liable? I think the developer's only liable if the product is proven to be actually defective or actively harmful or falsely represented under regulatory standards. But I think we then come back to this loop of how strict should the regulation be, and yeah. But ultimately, I think accountability lies with us using these algorithms, so clinicians and institutions rather than developers themselves.
Do you
Can I
agree as well?
add something? Yeah. I mean, also, this is again why it's not only regulations. As I was hearing Eleanor's response, I was even thinking it's training as well. These are not black or white types of questions. This is exactly why we need to sit down and have these difficult conversations. I think this is a time, this goes back to my point, and I mentioned this in my arguments, but this is the time to be intentional, mindful, and purposeful. So we need to have systems in place, not only regulations, training, these types of conversations, maybe things that we haven't thought of yet, that we will think once we talk seriously and reflect seriously about the implications. And I don't know, I see like with small things these days, but I feel there's so much of doing AI just for the sake of doing AI. And I say that as a user, there is probably not a single app in my phone that I don't open and I can't even turn it off. Is, oh, we just added AI. And I'm like, why? I don't want it. I don't see why what me as a user will gain with AI in that particular app. So for healthcare, I feel it's the same. Yes, there is a lot of potential, but let's be mindful and intentional about it. Why are we using it? How can it help? What are the implications? What are the conversations and the checkpoints we need to put in place? How exactly, as Eleanor was saying, I feel like right now this is still a little bit, I agree with her, but where is
It's
it
a trend.
written that it will
It's a
be the
trend.
clinician?
You've got to get on. Do you know what? The dementia researcher community has had an optional AI model in there for quite some time. If you're in dementia researcher and you click the little star button at the top, it can do things like summarize all the posts from today into a nice bite-sized chunk of today's news without you having to read them all. I suppose is this where we get into thinking about kind of big AI and small AI? That there's, small AI put in these different ways is one thing, but we need to think differently about big AI where we're changing, potentially changing health and care, which actually also takes us nicely into another question, which is AI models consume huge amounts of energy. Should
Mm.
sustainability be considered as part of ethical AI development in health and care research? Do you know the carbon footprint of your research, Eleanor?
I dread to think. I dread to think. I don't know the exact carbon footprint of my research. I don't think it's as big as some other people's. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, training AI consumes significant amounts of energy, and we need to consider that the net environmental impact needs to be reduced. It's something that we're seeing way more in grants. So we're seeing way more grant applications factor this in explicitly into aspects of their requests for funding.
That's
Yeah.
really good. I'm really pleased to see that it's come at this stage as well, not later. I mean, it's like the equivalent of patient and public involvement in qualitative research, right? It's the equivalent of that. It's like, if you're going to do AI though, you've got to show us how you're going to use this sensibly and offset. I like that that's a factor. What do you think? Do you have a view, Isabel?
Well, yes, it's something that we definitely need to consider. I would also argue that we need more research into it, not only on how it is right now, but also solutions, alternatives. How can we make it better? In terms of, don't ask me about my footprint, Adam, because yeah, I trained, as you mentioned, in the UK, and it was way easier to even, find stores there where you could just take your jars and buy. In the US, that's all very difficult. So my footprint is definitely worse now. At the same time, I've left the lab, so I do only bioinformatics now. But now going into AI, I'm not sure if that's more sustainable to begin with.
Well, this is one of the things, isn't it, I suppose, because AI is just this, for many people, it's just this invisible, it's just another part of the internet, right? It's just this magic box somewhere in the cloud that kind of makes these decisions that can perform these tasks that you set it without thinking about every time you ask, one of the Gemini or ChatGPT, whichever model it is, to do something that consumed a small amount of carbon. But I guess as AI researchers, or people who use AI in your research, you're more likely to be aware of that than others. We've got a question here. Michael asks, is a breakthrough treatment as a result of AI worth the cost of the disparities? Ooh, that's going to be a difficult one. Who would like to go first? Eleanor.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what sort of breakthrough treatment are we talking about here? I mean,
well, let's pick one. In recent weeks, we've had quite a few people on here talking about AI doing rapid reviews of existing medications for repurposing exercises, which seems to be a common one being used. I don't know if that's AI or machine learning or the same, but that's a common one that you could imagine, come up with something fairly quickly.
I guess, okay, so I mean, one way to think about that question is to consider that every major medical advance that has happened previously, even with AI not being involved, has initially begun as probably quite unevenly distributed. So it's begun as a niche case. I mean, we have that for antibiotics. We have that for things like weight loss drugs like Ozempic being first repurposed for diabetes. We even have that for things like vaccines. And it's once scaled that they overall reduce inequality in health outcomes. So I think like that, the ethical task with AI is not to reject the innovation in the first place, but to try and promote for equitable translation later down the line. Yeah, that's probably how I'd answer that.
Do you add to that, Isabel? And then we're going to go to closing statements.
It's a very difficult question because thinking about, is it worth it? I think these are sort of parallel problems or parallel things to think about. One shouldn't stop the other, but again, we should be mindful about it. This is how also, as being a woman, I know this very well in terms of history of still, let's go with BMI is one of the best examples. Everything has made originally for men, and then although yes, women also benefited in part, there were other things that actually women took a worse, especially, for example, women's health is a great example. There were other things that were left behind because of that. So I don't know if I would answer that yes, it's worth it, but maybe it's more things to think about in parallel. So one shouldn't hold the other, but at the same time, we shouldn't move forward forgetting about the other. It should go hand in hand, I think.
This debate is bringing me back to our very first debate a few weeks ago now. We talked about whether animal models had outserved their usefulness.
Yeah.
And I think in the end, the final view was that had we stood still with animal models from 10 years ago, they probably had, but animal model usage was modernizing, that it was trying to change and keep pace to remain relevant. And it kind of sounds like from both of your sides here, both agree that AI has value, but it could do this if you don't do this, which is kind of what I'm hearing. I'm going to now go to closing statements. I'm going to let Eleanor go first this time. You can make your closing statements. While you're doing that, I'm going to post the link in the chat for our final closing vote. If you've already made your mind up, you can jump in now, or if you want to wait and hear from Eleanor and Isabel before you make your final conclusions, you do have time. And I'm going to flag up on the screen a couple of points that people have made that were more points than questions while we're doing that. So Eleanor, over to you.
Okay, so I think what we need to consider here is that inequity in both healthcare and research is an old problem. It's not something that AI created. And the question before us, as Isabel put earlier, is whether AI is furthering those disparities. I think the evidence actually says no, and the real shift lies in both governance and regulation. AI has forced systems to codify fairness, transparency, and accountability in ways that we haven't really had to reckon with before. Today, no AI system enters clinical use in the UK without oversight. So the MHRA requires validation across all intended patient groups. NICE's digital health technology framework demands evidence of safety, performance, and subgroup fairness. The EU AI Act mandates explainability, traceability, and proportional risk controls. These aren't theoretical ideals. Equity is now a regulatory requirement in part because of the boom in AI. It's not just a charitable aspiration. The accountability here has also become explicit. So clinicians remain responsible for their interpretation. Institutions are going to remain responsible for validation. And developers have this problem of integrity with their design. So I think audit trials, bias testing, trying to make errors traceable, correctable, and reviewable. I think that's the level of scrutiny that we need to bring to this debate. We shouldn't conflate this exposure of inequity with its creation. AI is revealing these gaps that were potentially invisible before under our previous practice, and regulation is going to close them. So I think to reject AI just on the grounds of fairness is to overlook the fact that fairness has, for the first time, been written into this debate. These biases were here before. These biases are here to stay if we don't address them head on. AI isn't going to further these disparities if we let it. It's the reason that equity can now be made more transparent, more measurable, more enforceable, and more central to the governance of both health and research practice.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. Good points. Isabel, closing remarks?
Yes,
And
so
vote.
just in case this was unclear, I am not against AI. I am excited, honestly, about its potential to transform research, science, and healthcare, but I feel like I should represent a position that is most needed right now, which is the critical realist in a wave of hype. I would argue that optimism must not blind us. This is not the time for technological toxic positivity. It's the time, as I said before, for intentionality, humility, and courage to ask uncomfortable questions and have discussions like today's before it's too late. And we also need representation in development. Eleanor mentioned how developers need to consider their integrity. And I just thought, yes, that is another great point, is that we need whoever is building these systems to be aware of these inequalities or potential for inequalities, and to bring in diverse perspectives that can implement solutions. AI is not inherently good or bad, it's just a mirror. And if we don't like what we see reflected, the problem is probably not the mirror, it's probably us. So, yes, right now I argue that AI is or can further disparities in research and care. And I say that because I also think that acknowledging that truth, we can work together to solve it. And this is the first step toward changing it. We're moving fast, but not always forwards. So let's make sure we do move forward. And I will just finish my closing argument by thanking you, Eleanor, for the discussion, and thank you, Adam, for the moderation and for the engagement from our audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, so honestly, I'm persuaded by both of you. I think mine, as ever with so many of our debates, that there is no there is no black and white with many of these things, that there are shades of grey. And I think my view from today, and I shouldn't share my view. I'm going to get the audience view first, and then I'll share my opinion on this. So I'm going to share my screen now. We've had you voting for a few minutes now. Let's just, we've got some nice comments there. Kate saying, terrific debate. Thank you very much. Thank you for commenting. And here we go. This is our closing poll. There's another comment there. There we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oz.
Right. Let's show you the closing poll. So I'm just going to start by reminding you at the start of the debate, the House believes AI is furthering disparities in research and care. 27% agreed, 27% disagreed, and 45% were undecided. And here in our exit poll,
I bet more undecided. Oh,
58% disagree with the House this time around. So the number of people disagreeing with the House has almost doubled. The number of people agreeing with the House is more or less the same. It was 27% at the start, is 25% now, and 45% were previously undecided, and now it's 17. So on this occasion, Eleanor, it would appear that you've made some compelling arguments this evening that have persuaded, what's that, about 28% of the vote to swing in your favour.
I think I had the much easier side of this debate. I think Isabel
I agree.
did the hard job of arguing to agree with the House. And I think, I thought I was completely convinced by her argument. If I was voting, I would have changed my vote.
Well, congratulations, Eleanor. That was fair.
I completely agree. So my opinion is I mean, obviously, it's very hard to disagree that AI doesn't come with some incredible potential down, and we are already seeing that its ability to speed up the Moorfields Eye Hospital study was incredible. I was on the ethics review panel for that, and its ability to predict diabetic retinopathy more accurately than clinicians in a fraction of the time is just hard to disagree with. And if we can make more examples of that, but I do completely agree that there are massive risks that if we do continue to train it on old data and not recognize that. But what I love is that people like you, Isabel and Eleanor, that are using AI are very aware of the risks and drawbacks, and being aware of them means that you can address those as we go and make sure that we do things properly and don't wait for the regulation to catch up, because if we do that, we're not going to benefit as quickly as we'd like to, are we? Which is always a downside. Thank you so much this evening to the incredible Isabel Castanho and the unstoppable Eleanor Conole. You've been amazing as ever. We're going to be back in the salon next week. On Wednesday, I think it's at lunchtime this time. I'd have to. Anyway, it's in the Dementia Researchers Salon next week, and the motion next week is this House believes that grant funding should be distributed by lottery and not by peer review. We've got Dr. Byron Creese from Brunel University of London debating in favour of lottery. And we've got Dr. Subishaya Swain from University of Oxford. Oxford back again. It's like University Challenge. A different college is back again next week to argue against the House. So we'll look forward to seeing you next week in Salon. Thank you very much, Eleanor and Isabel. You've all been amazing. Have a great evening. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.